If we want to list every way Spreaker can help podcast publishers, well, we need a podcast of our own. Whether you're in charge of long-running series with extensive backlogs or countless limited series, you can organize and monetize your entire catalog with Spreaker. With Spreaker's customizable publisher plan, you can add collaborators, analyze extensive listener analytics, and even share exclusive content through custom RSS feeds. And that's just for starters. Head to Spreaker.com to learn more. That's SPREAKER.com.
In the last years of the 19th century, that human affairs were being watched from the timeless worlds of space. No one could have dreamed we were being scrutinized as someone with a microscope studies creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. Few men even considered the possibility of life on other planets. And yet, across the gulf of space, minds immeasurably superior to ours regarded this Earth with envious eyes. And slowly and surely, they drew their plans against us.
Broadcasting live
from a tiny studio somewhere in North America.
This is Dark Matters Radio Live. And now I give you your host,
the silverback of ufology.
Here's Don Ecker.
And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is a distinct pleasure to be back tonight and also to have you all joining us right here on KGRA with Dark Matters Radio. Now, I got a very special show tonight, one that really stretched my mind and my imagination. But before I introduce my guest, I got to give you a little background. I guess I was only about 6 or 7 years old as a small child when I had my first brush with somebody passing on into the great beyond. At the time, my mom and dad and I, this was even before my sister was born, or right around the time she was born, we were living in an apartment building before my parents built and bought their home. And there was a lady upstairs who was friends with my mom, and they'd been friends since about World War II, which would have been in the 1940s. Her name was Mrs. Caswell, and she was a sweet, sweet woman, very nice to small kids. I mean, it was, just really somebody that as a small child, I enjoyed being around. And then suddenly she dropped dead. And I got to tell you, as a little boy, I did not even begin to really understand what that meant. And it was then that my mom thought I needed to see what was going on, took me to the funeral home to view Mrs. Caswell before she was buried. And I got to say, I don't know even now, all these years later, if I was ready for that, because it stuck with me a very, very long time. Now, over the years, I've had many friends, many family members, as I'm sure you all have, that have passed on. In late 1971, while I was in Vietnam, right before Christmas, my grandfather, who had helped raise me when I was a small child, my dad had been called back to the Army for the Korean War. He was a World War II vet, and what they then termed retreaded him back into the service. Mom and I went to live with my grandparents, and I was very close to my grandfather. My grandfather was also a veteran of World War I and World War II. In his mid-40s, in 1943, he went back into the service as a combat engineer officer and ended up serving in China, Burma, and India. And when I tell you I had admiration for my grandfather, that doesn't begin to touch it. Well, while I was in Vietnam, my grandfather, who then was 74, had a heart attack. And they didn't think he was going to make it. And my mother went to the Red Cross, and they were able to get me out of Vietnam to go home. And I was able to see him. Well, it was in very early January while I was still home. He was in the Veterans Hospital, the Veterans Administration Hospital, and had another heart attack and succumbed. Well, when we found out, I got to tell you, I was beyond devastated. The day of his funeral, okay, I was sticking right next to my grandma. And the day of his funeral, after the funeral was over, back where I'm from in Pennsylvania, and it may be like that a lot of places, family and friends would come over to the deceased home, bringing food and that type of thing, and basically fellowship to show empathy and sympathy to the bereaved. Well, it was too much for me. So I went into a guest bedroom that my grandparents had in their house and laid down on the bed, and quite honestly, I started to cry my heart out. And suddenly something happened that, honest to God, to this day, I still cannot explain. I heard a very odd buzzing in the room. And my eyes were closed, and I opened up my eyes, and there was a blue light, a beautiful blue light that filled the bedroom. Now, I can't explain it. You may not believe it, but that's exactly what I experienced. And as I looked at this light, it seemed to grow brighter, and suddenly I was engulfed in peace. Now, looking back at it, I am totally convinced that was my grandfather letting me know that he was okay. That's what I believe, and I'll probably believe that until the day I leave this earth. Well, I ended up going back to Vietnam. I was seriously wounded on Easter Sunday, spent about 6 months in the hospital, and then came home, was discharged, started to go back to school, and my life took off from that point forward. But this was something that has always stuck with me. Now, I've always had an interest in that field of paranormal investigation, although I've never really jumped into it like I did with other things. Tonight's guest, I'm proud to say, is a gentleman that's been dealing with these types of things for over a decade. His name is Tony Rathman. He's the founder and the lead investigator for Entity Voices Paranormal Investigation. Now, a few weeks ago, I had on as a guest my very, very dear friend, Miss Renee Barnett. And Renee and I have been friends, and my wife, Vicki, for, boy, over 25 years. Renee was the person that told me about Tony. And we did a conference call, she and I, with Tony. And I said, Tony, I got to have you come on the show. And Renee told me, she said, you know, Tony has been working with something that is a basically supercharged spirits box. Now, I, of course, have heard that term before. At one point, on another cell phone I even had an app that claimed to be a spirit box. Now, to be real honest, I never really understood how that worked, but Renee told me about a friend of hers that had passed on. She contacted Tony, And Tony apparently was able to contact this entity. He recorded what he picked up from the spirit box, gave it to Renee, and she and other of her friends that knew the deceased said, "My God, that's him." So with that being said, Tony, it is a genuine pleasure to have you on the show tonight. How are you?
I'm doing great, Don, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me on.
You are more than welcome. Now, I put Tony on the spot the other day, and I told Tony about a woman that, as a matter of fact, Renee and my old radio producer, Jeff Floro, introduced me to. A woman by the name of Rebecca Fearing, who, as a matter of fact, I did interview on KGRA, but when I was on another network, I had interviewed Rebecca, and I had an amazing thing happen. Apparently, she was somehow, and I don't begin to understand it, in contact with my mother and my favorite uncle, who had also passed over. And my mom gave Rebecca a piece of information that, well, there's no way in God's green earth she could have known it ahead of time. And to make a long story short, I said, "Tony, let me ask you, since you've got this spirit box, what do you think the possibilities are to find out if you can still get in touch?" Well, Tony said he'd give it a shot. And Tony, what happened?
Well, believe it or not, and I know that when I sent you the first audio recording, there's an ear training that comes to it, because spirits speak differently than humans do. It's not a natural speech cadence. They speak quickly. They speak in rhythmic tones. They speak in syllables that aren't normal to human speech, but the words are there. And so I know you had trouble picking some of those out, but we got answers. The questions that you had given me and the information you were wanting me to look at, they knew about the information you had. They knew who you were when I asked these questions, and they gave some very interesting health remarks in regards to information that you had given. So there was no doubt that the information that was coming through the box was intelligent, was answering the questions that were asked, and were legitimate and answers that were direct answers to the questions I was asking.
Well, now, for all those people out in Radio Land that may not know what a spirit box is, would you please describe that to them? And you, and as a matter of fact, built your own, didn't you?
I've built probably 15 of them in the last 10 years, yes. So for people who don't know what a spirit box is, there are ones that you can buy on Amazon or other places that it's literally, it looks like a small transistor radio. And what it does is it'll scan radio frequencies, and it'll pick up information and communication and voices in between radio stations. So, you'll have a lot of skeptics that'll say, "Oh, you're just picking up radio waves," or the answers that you're getting are coming from radio stations.
Anomalous signals, so to speak.
Right, exactly. From, shortwave radios, or, there's a million radio signals that float around the atmosphere at any given time. So is that possible that you could pick up something like that? Yeah, absolutely, it's possible. But when you know that you're not picking up radio because of the tone of speech, of the way that it's being delivered, the fact that it's answering a direct question. I mean, I don't care how many radio waves are floating around out in the atmosphere right now. I don't know too many radio stations or ham radio operators that are saying my first and last name. That's just not common. Or receiving answers in Tagalog when my wife is from the Philippines and we're in Phoenix, Arizona, and getting answers through the box in her native language.
Wow. Okay. Now, Spirit box is a term that's very similar to a spirit board. Okay. Now, spirit board, another way of saying spirit board is a Ouija board. And you can buy a Ouija board practically anywhere. You can order them through online services, Amazon. You pick your site and you can find one. Now, I got to tell you, for many, many years, Tony, going back to the 1970s, I have heard some real horror stories about spirit boards where negative influences have filtered through them. Now, is there any danger of something like that with a spirit box?
Absolutely. There's no real difference whether you're using a Ouija board or whether you're using a spirit box, or even if you're just doing something as simple as using a digital recorder to get an EVP, electronic voice phenomenon. You're opening that door and you're opening it to the other side, and you're making a connection with that side, and you're inviting something in to communicate with you. So there is a risk in any of it. And are there dangers involved? You bet there are. And a lot of the horror stories that you're mentioning are because, I think the Ouija board says for people 6 and up. Well, I mean, I'm sorry. I think the last thing anybody wants is a 6-year-old child conjuring spirits. But the connection between using a Ouija board or using a spirit box, there's no difference in the connection you're making to that other side. And the risks are similar in all aspects of it.
Well, how do you protect yourself? Let us say, for the sake of argument, I decided I wanted to dabble with this. Now, I don't know, and I've already said this, very much about any of it. So let us say I were to purchase a spirit box and I began trying to use it. How could I be sure, or what should I do in order to be safe to protect myself from those negative influences?
Well, obviously there's a whole array of different prayers and certain sages and stuff to clear yourself, to break that path, to know how to shut that door down once it's opened. But those are sort of back end things that need to be done. The first thing that I would recommend to anybody that wants to try spirit communication, no matter what means they're using, is to find a paranormal group, and they are everywhere today. 20 years ago, they weren't publicly shown. I mean, you can go on the internet, search your local city for a paranormal group. I guarantee you're going to find one. But if you find one and they've been around long enough to have the experience that's needed, the first thing I would do is, if I wanted to get involved, is to get a hold of one of those groups. See if you can talk to the group, or maybe even go on an investigation with them and learn the rules of what to do and what not to do. It's the mistakes that are made of the well-known what not to do that causes half of those concerns that you were referring to about horror stories, about people dabbling with this. Well, it's because they were dabbling without the knowledge to do it correctly. And when you don't have that knowledge, that's when mistakes are made, and that's when bad things can happen. Now, they can still happen even if you do it right, but at least you know what not to do to help prevent it, and then you need to know what to do if something negative does come around.
Did you ever have any bad experiences?
Oh, yes. We have. When the first couple of years, 3 or 4 years when we started out, we started off slow. We started off doing haunted hotels, and then we started hitting haunted historic sites. And then as the years went by and we became more knowledgeable, became more advanced in what we knew, what we were doing, then we started doing private home and business investigations for people that were complaining about activities. But the ones that come to the top of my mind was an old hotel in Winslow, Arizona that we went to investigate, and they had underground tunnels that used to, in years past, run underneath the city. Now most of them were blocked off at this point, but the tunnel system was still there, so we got to go down there and investigate. But I mean, we had shadow figures running everywhere and voices coming out of nowhere and showing up on the recordings. But there was some rather nasty stuff down there. In fact, by the time we quit investigating, which I think was probably 3:00 in the morning, I remember my wife trying to get me to do the closing prayers to protect us, and I literally could not even. I couldn't even say the words. In fact, she was trying to get me to repeat after her just so that I could say them, and something was keeping me from literally even hearing what she was saying and keeping me from saying it myself. And so we had to go through all sorts of procedures to clear what had attached itself. And then, of course, I can think of another home investigation we did in Las Vegas that we had to go out and make contact with Archbishop James Cloud, who then referred us to a demonologist in LA who came, and they actually performed a minor rite ceremony on that home because of the negativity that was in there.
Well, now, there is the area that I'm usually involved in have to do with, today it's called UAP, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena. In the past, it was UFO, Unidentified Flying Objects. I've been involved in that field, Tony, for over 30 years.
Wow.
And I've got an associate and a friend down in Las Vegas who is very well known. He's a television newsman, commentator by the name of, excuse me. Oh, boy. Something went down the wrong pipe. By the name of, my God, my mind just went totally blank. I think one of your spirits nailed me. George Knapp, okay. And George has been very involved in Skinwalker Ranch. Oh. Are you familiar with that?
Oh, of course. Anybody who's involved in anything with UFOs, paranormal, or anything in between knows Skinwalker Ranch.
Well, George was involved with some people that were doing a documentary on it. And, of course, George can be traced back to this investigation when Robert Bigelow, the aerospace and hotel billionaire, had purchased that property and put the National Institute of Discovery Science out there. And at any rate, there were stories about some of these entities, whatever they are, aliens, interdimensional entities, skinwalkers, who knows what in the hell, okay? But following people that worked at the ranch home. And then suddenly, okay, they're experiencing poltergeist type activity. So I had George on this show with another guy, a film producer, Jeremy Corbell. And I asked him, I said, okay, George, how about you? You've been out there how many times? You've been all over that area. Have you ever taken anything home with you? And he got very quiet and finally admitted that, yes, something, in fact, did happen. But he would not go into it.
That is usually the case, especially if it's something extremely negative. People don't want, once that happens to you, it's not something you want to go into detail explaining again. And, although that question is asked a lot, I can totally understand why he shied away from answering the question more than just, yes, I have.
Well, we've only got a couple of quick minutes before we go to break. So let me ask you, I've already received some questions from the KGRA chat lounge. Let me read you the first one and get your response to it, okay?
Sure.
This is from one of our users, esteemed users, my buddy Libertas. And he says, do the spirits have to be resident where you are for them to respond to a spirit box? Tony?
No, they don't. Matter of fact, I was working and using the spirit box for some cold cases in completely different states, and communicating via obviously electronic channels, video conferencing and stuff with the family members that we were helping. And of course, the people we were trying to locate, which were already passed away, those spirits weren't anywhere near us. So no, time and space is a completely different equation for a spiritual entity, and we can make communication anywhere in the world if needed.
Okay, now this is from another one of our esteemed users, John Ostains, and John actually goes all the way back to my last network with this program. But he said, Tony, what prayers from which religious traditions do you find to be the most effective for cleansings?
Well, without a doubt, the St. Michael's prayer for protection, that one works very, very well, and a lot of them are from the Catholic religion. Roman
Catholicism, then.
Roman Catholicism, exactly. I mean, when you look at the one religion that really has a focus on negative entities and demonic entities, and having trained priests to be able to exorcise these, it's Roman Catholicism that focuses on that. And there, if you believe that demonic entities exist, then everything has its both good and bad sides to it. So if you believe in demonic, you have to believe in God, and therefore the two of them really are tied together. So you can't believe in one without the other, and therefore that is why those prayers and stuff have the most effect.
Well, anybody that is a fan of the Supernatural TV series that watched the last seasons 11 and 12 will know about Chuck and Amara. And if you're a fan, you know who Chuck and Amara are. And that perfectly jives into what you just said, Tony. Hey, we're at the first break. Let me go ahead and take that. My guest tonight, ladies and gentlemen, is Mr. Tony Rathman, who is the founder and the lead investigator for the Entity Voice Paranormal Investigations. And they are down in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, we got a whole lot more. So stick around. We'll be back.
Hi, folks. It's troubling times, and fear is pushing emotions, which in turn pushes health the wrong direction. Do you ever get an ache because life is uneasy? Try Life Change Tea at GetTheTea.com. Life Change Tea works on your digestive tract, helping to move food through quicker and comfortably so your health is spot on. Life Change Tea may not help with world issues, but it will help with your digestive issues. A glass a day helps keep the intruders away. So, change your life today. Log on to GetTheTea.com. That's GetTheTea.com. If your health game is off, get on by ordering Life Change Tea. GetTheTea.com. And while you're on our site, look around at the great non-GMO organic supplements. And if you're a sales shopper, go to our specials page and see what's for you. I've been drinking the tea for 12 years, and I'm sure glad for its health benefits. Again, that's GetTheTea.com. GetTheTea.com. The tea that makes you go.
Permanent industrial glue impossible to remove? Not anymore, because Handyman Formula by D-Bond is a patented chemical adhesive remover. It's used in the building and home maintenance industry, but now it's available for your home use, for your DIY projects. Unglue stickers, silicone rubber, labels, price tags, flex tape, weather stripping, carpet glue, wood glue, liquid nails, even 3M 5200. And it dissolves graffiti. Yeah, graffiti. Handyman Formula by D-Bond works, and it's safe to use on most surfaces. No need to call a professional. Don't get out the pliers and blowtorch. Just apply a little handyman formula by D-Bond and wait 90 seconds, then quickly and easily pull the items apart. Get unstuck. Visit dbondhandymanformula.com. That's dbondhandymanformula.com or call 561-575-4200. Handyman Formula by D-Bond.
For the thousands of wounded warriors returning from battle, Wounded Warrior Project has developed the Warriors to Work program, a career counseling service that helps wounded warriors translate their military experience to a civilian job. These extraordinary men and women bring more than just teamwork and inspiration to the workplace. They bring proven world-class job skills. And to ensure proper placement, Wounded Warrior Project works with employers to find just the right job fit. Talented, skilled, and eager to get back to work, you have the opportunity to hire a seasoned veteran. Contact Wounded Warrior Project at findwwp.org. Welcome home the brave.
You listen to us, and we listen to you. And so does the CIA. KGRAradio.com.
And we are back with the second half hour with my guest, Mr. Tony Rathman. Tony, while we were off the air during the break, I told you I was going to ask you what it was that brought you into this, well, there's no getting around it, this unusual field. Now, obviously, I did some research before the show, and you came from a very skeptical background. What caused you to take a look at this?
Well, real simply, my wife. She grew up in the Philippines. She's now an American citizen, but she grew up in the Philippines. And, you know, the culture in the Philippines is very superstitious. And, you know, any talk about spirits or ghosts, I mean, just creates fear in them because, you know, apparently they all have an experience to tell you about. And so my wife was kind of brought up with that culture. So, you know, when the paranormal shows started releasing, it caught her interest. And she'd always say to me, you got to watch this. This is really cool. You got to see this. Well, I couldn't sit there for more than three to 5 minutes when I'd get up and say, okay, yeah, this is for television. This isn't real. Well, at least that's what I thought. Well, then about 10 and a half years ago, it was Valentine's Day or Valentine's Day weekend. And my wife says, I want to do something different this year. Because normally we'd go to a hotel, we'd grab some drinks, we'd lay by the pool for the weekend, have fun. She says, I want to do something different. I said, okay, what do you want to do? She goes, I want to go ghost hunting. And I was like, oh my, you kidding me? You know? But of course, to appease her, I wanted to make her happy. It was Valentine's Day. So I did some research on the internet, happened to find a hotel that had a very distinct haunted reputation in the Phoenix area. And so I booked the weekend for us. I thought, okay, here's your chance. Well, then I thought I was done until I realized, wait, how's she going to investigate without equipment? So, of course, I went out and I bought her a night vision camera, digital recorder, EMF meter, and one other thing I can't remember what it was off the top of my head. But, of course, inexpensive stuff. You know, I figured it would be used once this weekend and probably never touched again. Well, so we went, and I played along, and I investigated with her, and we were roaming the hallways. We were snapping photographs left and right. We were video recording everything. We were doing EVP sessions. We were one of 3 guests in the entire hotel complex. There was 7 floors, 326 rooms, and there were only 2 other guests, and they weren't even on the floors we were on, and no one above us. Well, we covered the whole hotel, and the hotel at that time gave us permission. We got to go in their basement. We got to go into areas that were closed. So we spent the entire weekend investigating. Well, when we got back, she started reviewing the photographs, the video, the audio. She was calling me over every 3 minutes. You got to hear this. Listen to this. What's in this picture? What is that? That wasn't there. Look what's moving in this video. What is that? Well, I was absolutely just dumbfounded. I mean, it probably took me 3 months to even be able to rationalize the voices that were on the recorders, the images that were in the pictures, the moving apparitions that she had caught one on the video camera. And I mean, it was like 3 months of me mentally battling. Okay, there's a rational explanation for this. What is it? Well, I couldn't find it. And so then we started going back. My attention had been grabbed, and I wanted to see if this could be reproduced. So in the last 10 years, I think we investigated that hotel over 50 times. But we could reproduce it. And the names we were given, we could get to answer us again. So this is how it started. And it just continued to grow and branch out from that. But it was the experience from that weekend investigation where I thought, this was just going to be a lot of fun and laughs, really shocked me and put me in a mental state where I needed answers. And
okay, let me ask you an obvious question.
Sure.
At least it's obvious to me. Why would a camera capture a photograph of something that the human eye cannot detect in normal light? And also, why can a digital recorder capture voices that your own ear cannot hear?
Well,
now, I'm sure anybody on the street would probably think of those questions to ask.
Sure. Well, I've got answers for both. Let's take the voices on a digital recorder. Now, when people think of somebody speaking, they're thinking about a human speaking, where you've got a larynx, a throat, you've got the human speech patterns that vibrate in the eardrums and allow you to hear that sound. That doesn't happen from a spirit. Spirit has no voice, has no throat. So the sounds you are hearing are not coming from a vocal expression like human speech is from. They are coming from an electromagnetic frequency, which may not be able to be heard by the human ear, but I can tell you it can, but that's a whole nother story. But that's how they get onto the recorder. They are an electromagnetic frequency that's being placed onto the machine, which the machine then reads as if it was receiving vocal transmission of sound waves. And that's how it shows up on the machine. When you go back and play it, that voice is there.
So that's why I have seen in the past, and I'm talking about a number of years ago, there used to be a lot of ghost hunting series on television. I'm sure you're familiar with all of them.
Yep.
And I have seen people walking through cemeteries with digital recorders asking things like, is anybody here? Tell me, who's here? What's your name? That kind of thing.
Right.
And apparently sometimes they do get answers. Now, if I were a spirit, Tony, I kind of doubt that if I were still earthbound for whatever reason, I'd want to hang out in a cemetery. But hey, that's me. But how do you explain that?
Real simple. The ratio of people living to the people who have passed is probably 100 to 1 or more. They are not just in cemeteries. They are everywhere. And I can tell you that from a decade of experience of doing EVPs in the most uncommon locations you can imagine. We have gotten spirit voices in a vehicle with just my wife and I doing 75 miles an hour down the road, and we get answers from someone who's not in the car. So if we've got them in our car, you can guarantee you can find them at the cemetery. Does it mean they're all hanging out in the cemetery? No, it just means they are all over, and you can find them just about anywhere.
Okay, now here's another, to me, obvious question. Now, since human beings, Homo sapiens sapien, have been around anywhere from 300,000 to perhaps close to 1,000,000 years, and you'll even find people that will argue that Homo sapiens sapiens have been around longer. If you stop to think about it, that is a hell of a lot of human beings that at one point or another were right here on the planet. Now, I've got to presume that all of those people, in fact, had, depending upon your culture, your background, whatever, a spirit, a soul, whatever you want to call it. Now, I've always kind of thought that when someone passes on, that soul goes back to the great, soul blender, whatever the hell it is. And at some point, that soul will be recycled. Now, for example, I find the concept of reincarnation to be perfectly acceptable for me. But,
Sure.
I've read many things. As a matter of fact, I've interviewed somebody. I interviewed a doctor a couple of years ago that basically died, went into the great beyond, ended up, as he came back, he recalled this, and he wrote a book about it, a guide once he got there. When he got back, it turned out, after a lot of investigation, and I can't even do justice to his story in 30 seconds, but it turned out that his guide was what would have been a sister that died before he was born.
Okay.
Now, I kind of got chills when I read that, and even talking about it now, it kind of gives me chills. But do you have any insight into that? Why do some apparently spirits stay planet-side when they could move on? And do you have any insight into what may happen when, in fact, they do move on?
Sure, absolutely, I do. When
do you like those questions, Tony?
Oh, of course. I absolutely love them.
I mean, are they questions that you get a lot of, or okay?
Oh yeah, they're questions that people who are truly trying to figure out answers. Those are the questions that usually come up, and one of them is exactly what you just asked. Why are all these souls still here? Well, I can't answer why they're all here, because I'm sure it's individual reasons for each. But what I can tell you is that we as humans have one very distinct trait, and it's called free will. And because we're allowed to make our own decisions, we're allowed to have our own thoughts, we're allowed to say, no, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to do this. If the soul, which is energy, and according to physics, energy cannot be created or destroyed, it can only transform, then if the spirit is energy, it can only transform. It will not be created or destroyed, which means all these spirits have been around from whatever you call day one. But that free will aspect of who you are, I believe that's retained. So these spirits might be coming back to check on somebody. They might be coming back to see a grandchild that they never got to see. They might be coming back to for any number of reasons. Maybe something traumatic happened in their life. Maybe they're trying to get answers to somebody. I mean, the list just goes on and on as to why. But the bottom line is, just because they're still around doesn't mean they're trapped. And that's the one area of the paranormal that probably my wife and I, as well as other friends within the paranormal, agree upon, is that just because a spirit is here doesn't mean he's stuck or he's trapped or they can't move on. There may be a perfectly good reason why they're here, and they should have the free will to transcend those planes as they wish.
Okay, now here's another one. And I came from an area in central western Pennsylvania where it had a number. My religious upbringing was in a much more liberal environment, okay? It was more of a mainstream religious denomination.
Sure.
But we had those small fundamentalist sects, quite a few of them, as a matter of fact, the fire and brimstone variety, all right? Now, the big thing was, if you do that, you're going to hell. You're going to burn for all of eternity. Well, I always thought that was, I'll be just very blunt, I always thought that was bullshit. But a lot of people don't, okay? There are a lot of people that really genuinely believe that. Now, in all the years that you've been dealing with and attempting to interact with spiritual entities, did you ever come across references to hell? You've already mentioned that you've had negative influences affect you, but what about the concept of hell, Tony?
The concept is there, but not so much as a place. I mean, when you ask people about heaven or hell, they point up, they point down. It to them it's a place. I don't believe it's a place. It's an emotional state, and that we've had references even from spirits about both. So they exist, but not maybe in the sense that most people think of them. Like even the concept of purgatory, and whether any of that can be proven or not, still to this day within the paranormal, nobody has those answers. But what we do know is that in the hundreds of investigations we've done, anytime anyone or any person has committed suicide or taken their own life, we have come across locations where that spirit is still stuck in that location as many as 80 to 100 years later. So what is that? Is that hell? Is that purgatory?
Is that because the person, do you think, now this is only pure speculation, I'm sure you wouldn't know, I'm sure, any more than I would, but
correct.
What that person did, the circumstances, the situation was such that they are mentally unable to move on, as opposed to being chained there.
Well, we've heard references to both mentally and physically unable. So if you think about it in the context, and again, these are all hypothetical theories, and because that's all we can deal with right now, or deal in with. But yeah, I mean, it's almost like a punishment if they had taken their own life, rather than passing of natural causes or something that they didn't commit on their own. Like they're being put in a corner, a punishment corner, for so long to maybe think about what they've done, or I can't answer that. But what I can tell you is that we've run into that time and time again, where if they've taken their own life, they literally have told us, I can't leave, I'm stuck. Whether that's physically stuck, mentally stuck, or anything in between. But if you are spirit made up of energy and intellectual thoughts that are transmitted through energy, there really is no physical restraints. I mean, you're being restrained by that universe that surrounds you, and that can be heaven, hell, purgatory, or anything in between.
Okay, I got several more questions that have popped up. This is from one of our esteemed users, Ronald. And Ronald wants to know, Tony, when using a Spirit Box application on a cell phone, are they accurate?
Well, I can only give my personal opinion on that. I mean, I've dealt with Spirit Box apps for as long as they've been around. I have only had one intelligent response from one called EchoVox, and that is the only response I've ever gotten from an app.
Okay, all right. Now, Libertas Libertas. I got in trouble with him one time because I kept mispronouncing his username. Let's just say old Lib, all right? He's got a couple of questions. And he says, how does a spirit follow you home, Tony? And can spirits always be removed from somebody's home if the residents do not want them there? And if they can, how do you do it?
Okay, extensive question, but let me break that apart. How does a spirit follow you home? Well, they can follow you anywhere. We run a haunted hospital, which was the old Phelps Dodge Hospital. Today it's called the Copper Canyon Paranormal Research Center, because that's what we do there, research. We allow other paranormal investigators to stay there overnight and do their own investigations as well. But that's in Ajo, Arizona. We had a spirit follow us from that location to when my wife and I went to Baguio City, Philippines to investigate the Diplomat Hotel. His voice showed up on our EVPs in the Diplomat Hotel. That is literally on the other side of the world. So moving for them is not a problem. And if they want to follow you home, even easier, because it's probably a lot closer than the other side of the world.
Well, okay, now, let's say you suspect they did follow you home, and you don't want them there. How do you get rid of them?
Well, if you're not familiar with the paranormal, obviously the first thing to determine is what followed you. Is this a human spirit? Is this an angry human spirit? Is this a non-human spirit or a demonic entity? And the way to remove each one of those is different. So to go through all those aspects of it, I probably don't have time to do right now.
No, what we've got right now, we've got approximately 4.5 minutes, and then we can also pick up on the next hour.
Sure, but can they be removed? Yes, they can, but it depends on what type of spirit. A demonic entity, if it truly is demonic, is 100 times more difficult than removing a human spirit. And a lot of the times, the other aspect is, who is this human spirit? Is it a family member? Is it somebody who's actually watching over you? There's so many variables that have to be determined before you can just say, okay, yeah, let's remove it. You may be removing somebody you don't want to remove. So there's so many questions involved in that question. It's more difficult for me to answer than to just give a one sentence answer that's going to answer every aspect of it.
Well, I've got a personal recollection here. After my